Turning 68 had never seemed important to me before. I had always treated birthdays as ordinary days. Another sunrise, another cup of coffee, another list of things that needed doing. But that morning, the silence felt different. I woke at 7, brewed my usual black coffee, and carried it to the wooden table in my kitchen. The refrigerator hummed in the background. Outside, the neighborhood was slowly coming alive, but inside my house, there was nothing but quiet. I wasn't expecting a party. Still, I had expected a call, maybe a simple happy birthday, Mom, from my daughter, Lauren. Nothing came. For 3 years, I had been transferring exactly $1, $200 every month into a joint account shared with Lauren. She had originally asked for the money because she and her husband, Marcus, were supposedly facing a financial disaster. "Mom, we're going to lose the house," Lauren had told me one night, her voice trembling. "We don't know what else to do." I was a widow. I had spent decades working administrative jobs, saving carefully, avoiding unnecessary debt, and building a modest nest egg. I wasn't wealthy, but I had enough to help my daughter, so I did. I told myself that being a good mother sometimes meant making sacrifices. What I didn't realize was that I had slowly become their emergency fund, their safety net, and eventually their personal bank. At 8:15 that morning, I opened my tablet while finishing my coffee. I checked the news, then absent-mindedly opened social media. The first photograph on my screen made my hand stop. There was Lauren. Beside her stood Marcus, and between them was Marcus's mother, Sylvia. All three were at an airport, wearing ridiculous Hawaiian leahs and smiling as if they had just won the lottery. The caption beneath the photograph read, "Surprise trip to Hawaii for the woman who has always believed in us." I read it twice, then a third time. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. For years, Lauren had told me they were struggling to keep their mortgage current. She had cried over unpaid bills. She had asked for extra money when unexpected expenses appeared. Yet here they were, preparing for a Hawaiian vacation. I didn't cry. Something inside me simply went cold. I opened my banking app. The joint account showed a balance of $43,200. I stared at that number, $43,200. 3 years of my money. Money I had believed was protecting my daughter's home. Money they had apparently been saving for themselves. I didn't call Lauren. I didn't call Marcus. Instead, I selected the entire balance and transferred it into my personal savings account. Under the memo line, I typed, "Funds returned." Then I pressed confirm. The account dropped to 0. I placed my phone face down on the table. For the first time in years, I felt strangely calm. I wasn't going to spend my birthday begging my daughter to explain why she had lied to me. I was going to take my life back. I slipped on my shoes and walked 4 blocks to the neighborhood hardware store. "Morning, George," I said to the man behind the counter. "I need the strongest deadbolt you've got." He raised an eyebrow. "Placing an old one, something like that." Lauren had a spare key to my house. She had always treated my home as though it belonged partly to her. She would let herself in, leave boxes in my guest room, take food from my refrigerator, and occasionally arrive without warning. That key had represented more than access to my house. It represented access to me. I wasn't giving her that anymore. Back home, I removed the old lock and installed the new one myself. 15 minutes later, I turned the key. Kamik. The sound was strangely satisfying. Then my phone began ringing. "Lauren." I let it ring. A few minutes later, she called again, then again. Finally, I answered. "Mom!" Her voice was sharp with panic. "What did you do to the account?" I said nothing. "Marcus's card was declined at the airport. We have a flight boarding in 2 hours." I looked out at my garden. "Lauren," I said quietly, "the money is back in my account." There was a long silence, then Marcus grabbed the phone. "Evelyn, listen carefully. This is obviously some kind of banking mistake. We need you to transfer it back immediately." I almost laughed. "No mistake," I said. "The arrangement is over. Our vacation should have been paid for with your own money." I ended the call, then I powered off my phone. My birthday had barely begun, but already I knew something important. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for my family to decide what I was worth. I had finally decided for myself. I made myself lunch after the call. I chopped vegetables slowly, listening to the steady rhythm of the knife against the cutting board. My hands were calm, even though I knew Lauren and Marcus wouldn't simply accept what had happened. They had lost access to their money. More importantly, they had lost access to me. I finished my salad, cleaned the kitchen, and then went to the guest room. For years, Lauren had treated the room as a storage unit. Clothes she no longer wore, shoes still in boxes, shopping bags. An expensive espresso machine she claimed she would use someday. I began carrying everything outside. If they had enough money for a Hawaiian vacation, they could certainly find room for their belongings. I stacked the boxes neatly beneath the covered porch. About an hour later, tires screeched into my driveway. I didn't need to look outside. Lauren was pounding on my front door before I reached it. "Mom, open the door!" I walked over but didn't touch the handle. Instead, I opened the small, frosted window beside the door. Lauren stood outside, her face flushed. Marcus was behind her, repeatedly glancing toward the street. "The lock is new," I said. "What did you do?" Lauren demanded. "You ruined everything." I returned my money. "You knew we were at the airport." "Yes. Do you even know what today is?" I looked at her. "My birthday." She froze. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Marcus stepped forward. "This is incredibly cruel," he said. "We promised Sylvia this trip. She's been looking forward to it for months. Then you should have paid for it yourselves. You don't understand." "No," I replied. "I understand perfectly." I told them exactly what I had discovered. 3 years of monthly transfers, $43,200, money supposedly intended to prevent foreclosure. Money that had somehow remained untouched while they planned a luxury vacation. Lauren's expression changed. "You gave us that money. I gave it to you because you told me you were losing your home. We were struggling. You were taking my money while buying a vacation." Lauren's eyes filled with angry tears. "You're my mother, and you're an adult." She stared at me as if those words had wounded her more deeply than anything else I could have said. I pointed toward the porch. "Your belongings are outside. Take them with you today. Anything left tomorrow goes to charity. You can't just throw me out." "You haven't lived here for years, Lauren." She opened her mouth, but no answer came. I closed the window. Behind me, I heard her pounding once more. Then the noise stopped. A few minutes later came the scrape of cardboard boxes across the porch, then the sound of a car pulling away. I returned inside. My house felt different, not empty-free. I turned my phone back on. There were several missed calls and messages. One was from my son, Adrian. "Mom, happy birthday. I'll call tonight. Is something happening with Lauren?" She sent me a voice message saying you've lost your mind. I smiled sadly. Lauren had always been good at controlling the story. I replied, "Thank you, sweetheart. Everything is fine. I just made a financial decision. We'll talk tonight." At 8 that evening, Adrian called through video chat. His face appeared on my tablet. "Mom, you look calm," he said. "I am." He frowned. "Lauren called me 3 times. She says you stole her savings and destroyed Sylvia's vacation." I reached for the papers on my coffee table. "I didn't steal anything." I turned the camera toward the documents. 3 years of bank statements, screenshots of Lauren begging for mortgage assistance, and the photograph from the airport. Adrian stared at everything. "How much were you sending every month?" $1,200. He did the calculation silently. "That's $43,200. "Exactly." His expression hardened. "Mom, Lauren told me you refused to help them years ago. She said you couldn't afford it. I paid my own bills." Adrian rubbed his forehead. "She's been telling everyone a different story." Then he became quiet. Finally, he said, "I've been paying Marcus's car payment since January." I stared at him. "What?" "They told me they were facing bankruptcy. They said they were helping Sylvia financially." I couldn't believe it. "What kind of car?" Adrian hesitated. "A 2023 model." I shook my head. "Cancel the payments." "I already did." He looked ashamed. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have asked questions." "So should I?" "No, they lied to both of us." For the first time that day, I realized the problem wasn't only what Lauren had taken from me. She had been pulling everyone into the same deception. And now the truth was beginning to unravel. Adrian looked directly into the camera. "What are you going to do now?" I glanced toward the hallway. At the end of it was Lauren's old bedroom, a room that had belonged to my daughter when she was a child. a room she had continued treating as hers long after she had moved out. I smiled faintly. I said, I'm finally going to reclaim that room too. Adrian laughed. Good. After we ended the call, I walked to the guest room and opened the door. For years, I had been afraid of upsetting my daughter. That night, I realized something. Peace wasn't the absence of conflict. Sometimes peace began when you finally stopped being afraid of it. The next morning, I woke with more energy than I had felt in years. There was something liberating about finally making decisions without worrying about how Lauren might react. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and looked down the hallway toward her old bedroom. The door was slightly open. For nearly a decade, I had left that room untouched. Lauren had moved out after marrying Marcus, but she continued calling it my room. She stored clothes there, kept boxes stacked against the walls, and treated it as though she could return whenever she wanted. That ended now. I drove to the hardware store and bought paint. I chose a clean white for 3 walls and a soft sage green for the 4th. The room would become a reading and sewing room. Something for me. By noon, I had moved the furniture, cleaned the shelves, and started painting. The first coat of white covered the dusty pink walls surprisingly quickly. I was halfway through the 2nd wall when I heard the front gate squeak. I stopped. Nobody knocked. A few seconds later, there was a tap against the front window. I knew who it was. Lauren. I set the roller down and wiped my hands. When I opened the door, she looked completely different from the woman who had stood there the previous afternoon. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were swollen. She looked exhausted. "Mom," she said quietly. I waited. "Adrian canceled Marcus's car payments. He made his own decision. You turned him against us." "No," I said. "He saw the statements." She looked past me, then her eyes landed on the freshly painted wall. "You painted my room?" "I painted my new study." Her face fell. For once, she didn't immediately argue. She simply stood there, staring into the house. I could almost see the realization settling over her. This wasn't temporary. I wasn't angry for a day and waiting to forgive her. I was changing my life. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already did." Her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, we're drowning." I said nothing. Marcus put the Hawaii tickets on credit cards because he thought the account would cover them. If we cancel, we lose a huge portion of the money. That isn't my responsibility. If we go, we can't afford food. Then don't go. She looked at me desperately. "Please, just give me half." "No. Mom, I'm begging you. You've been begging me for 3 years. That was different." "How?" She couldn't answer. I watched her grip the strap of her purse. Then she said, "The mortgage situation got complicated." "Really?" "Yes." "Then show me the paperwork." She looked away. I continued. "Show me the foreclosure notice. Show me the missed payment letters. Show me anything proving the house was actually in danger." Her silence told me everything. I crossed my arms. "When did you buy the Hawaii tickets?" She swallowed. "I don't remember." "Yes, you do." "Mom, November?" Her face went pale. I remembered that month clearly. Lauren had called me crying, saying the roof needed urgent repairs. She had asked me for an additional $2,000 from my Christmas savings. That same month, apparently, she had purchased airline tickets. "You were planning the vacation while telling me your house was falling apart." "It wasn't like that." "Then explain it." She couldn't. A bird chirped from a nearby tree. The ordinary sound made the silence between us even more uncomfortable. Finally, Lauren whispered, "Marcus handled most of it." I shook my head. "You're his wife. You were both responsible." She wiped her cheek. "I thought you'd always help me. I thought you'd always tell me the truth." Her expression broke. For a second, I saw the little girl she had once been. But she wasn't that little girl anymore. She was a grown woman who had made choices, and those choices belonged to her. "Go home, Lauren," I said gently. "Sit down with Marcus and figure out your finances." "What about us? You need to learn how to stand without me holding you up." She stared at me. "Are you really never going to help me again?" "Not financially." She lowered her eyes, then she turned toward the driveway. Before she reached the gate, she stopped. "Do you hate me?" The question caught me off guard. "No." She looked back. "I love you." "Then why does this feel like punishment?" "Because consequences can feel painful even when nobody is trying to hurt you." She said nothing. I watched her walk away. Then I closed the door, the new deadbolt clicked into place. I returned to the room and picked up my paint roller. Stroke by stroke, the old pink disappeared. That afternoon, I received another message. This time, it wasn't from Lauren. It was from Sylvia. She wanted to come over. I knew exactly what she intended. She believed Lauren and Marcus had been wronged, and she was coming to tell me so. I made a fresh pot of tea. Then I sat in my living room and waited. At noon the following day, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Sylvia standing on my porch in an immaculate outfit, her expression rigid with disapproval. I took a slow breath, then I opened the door. "Come in," I said. Sylvia smiled without warmth. "I think we need to have a conversation." I stepped aside. "Yes," I replied, "I think we do." And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what anyone in my family might say, because the truth was finally on my side. Sylvia sat on my sofa with her legs crossed, looking around my living room as though she were inspecting a property. I poured tea into 2 cups and placed one in front of her. She didn't touch it. "Evelyn," she began, "I think this entire situation has gone much too far." I sat across from her. "I agree. Lauren is devastated. I imagine she is. She believes you abandoned her. I didn't abandon her. I stopped financing her." Sylvia's expression tightened. "You're her mother, and she's an adult. You have enough money to help them." I looked directly at her. "That isn't the point." "It absolutely is. If you have resources and your daughter needs help, why wouldn't you give it?" "Because she lied about why she needed it." Sylvia waved her hand dismissively. "Families don't keep score." I almost smiled. "Families shouldn't have to." She leaned forward. "Lauren has always been a devoted daughter. Then she shouldn't have deceived me." "You're making this sound much worse than it is." I reached for the folder beside me. Inside were 3 years of bank statements. I placed them on the coffee table. "Do you know how much I transferred?" Sylvia glanced down. "No, $43,200. Her eyebrows lifted. I continued. "I sent that money because Lauren told me their home was in danger. She made me believe they were struggling to keep a roof over their heads." Sylvia didn't respond. "Meanwhile," I said, "they were planning a Hawaiian vacation. They had every right to take a vacation." "Absolutely." I paused, after paying their bills. Sylvia's face hardened. "You're punishing them because they wanted to do something nice for me." "No. I'm refusing to pay for something I was never told about." She looked toward the window. "Lauren said you promised to support them. I promised to help during a crisis." "And this is your idea of helping?" "My idea of helping is letting adults handle the consequences of their own choices." Sylvia finally picked up the tea. She took one sip and immediately set it down. "You're being selfish." I felt the old instinct rise inside me, the urge to defend myself, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "Perhaps." She looked surprised. I continued, "If being selfish means protecting my savings after years of deception, then I'm comfortable with that." Sylvia stood. "I hope you're satisfied." "I am." She walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned around. "You've damaged your relationship with your daughter." "No," I said quietly. "Her choices damaged it." Sylvia left. I closed the door. Then I stood there for several seconds. The house was quiet again. But this time, the quiet felt peaceful. That evening, I finished painting the study. The sage green wall looked beautiful in the fading sunlight. I moved my favorite chair beside the window and placed a small reading lamp next to it. For years, I had kept that room frozen in the past. Now it belonged to my future. On Friday morning, I woke to another message from Lauren. "We canceled the trip. Marcus is furious. Sylvia won't speak to me. I hope you're happy." I stared at the screen. A month earlier, I might have called immediately. I might have apologized. I might have offered money just to stop the conflict. But I knew better now. Lauren had made his decision. Then she had made another and another. The consequences weren't mine to carry. I put my phone away. Around 11, I went into the garden. The morning air was crisp, and sunlight spilled across the flowers. For once, I wasn't thinking about bills. I wasn't calculating what I could afford to give someone else. I was thinking about myself. That afternoon, I packed a small overnight bag, a few clothes, a book, my toiletries. Nothing more. I had found a quiet bed and breakfast in the mountains several hours away. I booked the room using a tiny portion of the money I had recovered. It wasn't an extravagant trip. It wasn't meant to prove anything. I simply wanted to go somewhere peaceful. Before leaving, I walked through my house. The kitchen was clean. The new lock was secure. The study was finished. Everything looked familiar, yet somehow completely different. I had spent years believing my home was a place where everyone else could feel comfortable. Now I understood something. I deserved to feel comfortable there too. My ride arrived just after lunch. I locked the front door and tested the deadbolt once, twice, then I smiled. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the house. I wasn't leaving because I was running away. I was leaving because I finally had somewhere worth returning to. For the first time in years, my future didn't revolve around rescuing someone else. It belonged to me. The mountains were exactly what I needed. There were no ringing phones, no frantic messages, and no family arguments waiting for me when I opened my eyes. I spent the first morning sitting on the porch of the little bed and breakfast, drinking coffee and watching the mist move between the trees. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about what someone needed from me. I was thinking about what I wanted. I read for several hours. Then I walked through the small mountain town, stopping at shops whenever something caught my attention. Nobody knew me there. Nobody knew my family. Nobody expected me to solve anything. That simple freedom felt almost luxurious. When I returned home the next afternoon, I noticed something immediately. The house felt different, not because anything had changed while I was gone, because I had. I unpacked my bag and placed my books on the shelf in my new study. Then I sat beside the window and looked at the sage-green wall. I smiled. A week earlier, I had been afraid that setting boundaries would destroy my family. Now I understood that boundaries weren't destroying anything. They were revealing what had already been broken. The following weeks were difficult for Lauren and Marcus. They had to cancel their vacation. The airline refunded only part of the money. Their credit card bills remained. Marcus's expensive car payment became impossible to ignore after Adrian stopped covering it. Eventually, they sold the vehicle. Lauren also returned to full-time work. For years, she had told me that working fewer hours was necessary because of their financial situation. Now she was working longer hours because she had no one's left to rescue her. I didn't celebrate their struggles. I wasn't interested in watching them suffer. I simply refused to fix them. Adrian continued calling me regularly. Our relationship changed too. We spoke more honestly. He admitted how embarrassed he felt after realizing how much money he had been sending Marcus. "I should have known something was wrong," he told me one evening. "You trusted your sister. I trusted the story she gave me. So did I. There was no reason to punish ourselves forever for believing someone we loved." What mattered was what we did after learning the truth. Adrian started rebuilding his finances. He stopped paying bills that weren't his responsibility. And he began saving for his own family again. A few months passed. Lauren's messages became less frequent. At first, I thought that was a good thing. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before answering. "Hello? Hi, Mom." Her voice was different. There was no anger, no accusation, no emergency, just exhaustion. "Hi, Lauren. How are you?" "I'm doing well." "How about you?" "Tired." I smiled slightly. "Tired isn't always bad." "No," she said. "I guess it isn't." There was silence. Then she said, "I just got home from work. How's the job?" "Hard. But I like having my own paycheck again." I leaned back in my chair. "That sounds like a good thing." "It is." Another pause. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "Mom, I'm sorry." I didn't answer immediately. She continued. "I know I've said sorry before, but I don't think I actually understood what I did." I listened. "I kept telling myself you were helping because you could afford it. I convinced myself that since you were my mother, you were supposed to keep helping." Her voice cracked. "But I lied to you." "Yes," I said gently. "I know, and you lied to Adrian." "I know." She took a breath. "I don't expect you to trust me again right away. That would be impossible." "I understand." Then came the question I had never expected to hear. "Could I come over sometime?" I looked around my study, the room that had once belonged to her, the room that now belonged to me. "Yes," I said. There was a long silence on the other end. Really? Yes. But we're going to do things differently. I know. No money requests. I know. No emergencies manufactured to pressure me. I know. And if you need advice, you can ask. But I won't solve your problems for you. Her voice became softer. Okay, Mom. We ended the call a few minutes later. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I had won. I simply felt relieved. The door between us wasn't wide open anymore. But it wasn't locked forever either. That Sunday, Lauren came over carrying a small paper bag. She stood on my porch and waited for me to open the door. She didn't use a key. That mattered more than she probably realized. Inside the bag were pastries. I remembered you like these, she said. I smiled. I do. We sat at the kitchen table. For the first time in years, my daughter wasn't asking me for money. She wasn't explaining a crisis. She wasn't telling me why somebody else was responsible for her problems. She was simply sitting with me. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and real was enough. I had spent years confusing love with sacrifice. I thought being a good mother meant constantly giving, constantly forgiving, and constantly protecting my children from consequences. I finally understood that love without boundaries can become something unhealthy. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is stop carrying what belongs to them. Lauren needed to learn that. And I needed to learn it too. My life hadn't become smaller when I stopped rescuing everyone. It had become larger, quieter, more honest, and, finally, mine part 6. The door I chose to open 3 months later, my life had settled into a rhythm I barely recognized. And I loved it. My new study had become my favorite room in the house. The sage green wall caught the afternoon sunlight beautifully, and my reading chair sat beside the window where I could watch birds move through the garden. My finances were steady again. The $2,200 monthly transfer had stopped. The $43,200 I recovered remained safely in my savings account, where it could finally serve the purpose I had intended for it, my future. Adrian visited more often, too. He brought his children, and the house was filled with their laughter every other weekend. He had managed to repair the damage to his finances after ending the payments he had been making for Marcus. He seemed lighter now, so did I. Lauren was different, too. She kept her distance. She no longer had a key to my house, and she understood that arriving without warning wouldn't get her inside. Her messages were occasional and careful. At first, they were mostly simple greetings. Then, slowly, they became conversations. She told me about work. She complained about being tired. She mentioned that she and Marcus were trying to pay down their debts. They had sold his expensive car to handle some of the credit card balance left behind by the canceled vacation. None of it was easy, but it was theirs to handle, and that distinction mattered. One Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Lauren. Hi, Mom. Her voice was quiet. Hi, Lauren. How are you? Tired. I just got home from work. How's everything going? Better. I smiled. That's good. She hesitated, then she said, I wanted to ask you something. I waited. Would it be okay if I came over Sunday? I looked around my study. There was a time when that question would have sounded strange. Lauren had never asked permission before. She had simply appeared. Now she was asking. Of course, I said. Really? Sunday afternoon works. I could bring pastries. You know I won't say no to pastries. She laughed softly. What time? 5? 5 works. There was another pause. Thanks, Mom. We hung up. I placed the phone on the table and opened my book again. I wasn't pretending the past hadn't happened. I wasn't forgetting the lies. I wasn't suddenly handing Lauren another key or another bank account. Forgiveness didn't require foolishness. Trust wasn't something I owed her. It was something she would have to rebuild. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson I had learned. Love doesn't mean allowing someone to repeatedly hurt you. It doesn't mean paying every bill because you're afraid they'll struggle without you. It doesn't mean remaining silent when someone manipulates your kindness. And it certainly doesn't mean emptying your own life so someone else can live comfortably. For years, I had believed that saying no would make me a bad mother. Instead, saying no taught me how to become a healthier one. When you constantly rescue an adult from the consequences of their choices, you don't necessarily help them. Sometimes you simply teach them that consequences belong to someone else. I had spent years carrying responsibilities that were never mine: Lauren's mortgage, Marcus's debts, their vacations, their emergencies, their excuses. I carried all of it because I thought that was what love required. But love isn't supposed to leave you frightened every time your phone rings. It isn't supposed to make you feel like an ATM with a birthday. And it shouldn't require you to sacrifice your dignity just to keep peace inside the family. The morning after my 68th birthday had begun with disappointment. No call, no message, no celebration. Just a photograph that revealed the truth. But that photograph had given me something far more valuable than a birthday greeting. It had given me clarity. I reclaimed my money. I changed my locks. I reclaimed my home. I reclaimed a room that had been frozen in my daughter's past and turned it into a space for my own future. Most importantly, I reclaimed my voice. I learned that boundaries aren't punishment, they're instructions. They tell people where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. And sometimes the strongest boundary is a closed door. Not because you hate the person standing outside, but because you finally learned that you deserve to feel safe on the other side. On Sunday, Lauren arrived at 5 exactly. She stood on my porch, holding a box of pastries. And she waited. She didn't try the door. She didn't use an old key. She simply rang the bell. I opened it. For a moment, we looked at each other, then I smiled. "Come in." She smiled back. "Thank you, Mom." I stepped aside. The door opened. This time, I wasn't opening it because I was afraid to say no. I was opening it because I wanted to. And there was a world of difference between the two. My life belonged to me again. And for the first time, I understood that protecting my peace didn't make me the villain. It made me the author of my own life. Sometimes happiness begins with 2 simple words. No more.